Welcome back everyone to another episode of the Vinyl Brotherhood. As you know, we spend a lot of time here enjoying and discussing music, and naturally so because it's a huge part of our lives and we love it. But like many of you all, I also love watching a good movie once in a blue moon. We all have our favorites. For one reason or another, the right story can find its way to our hearts and teach us something true or help us understand our lives and the world we occupy a bit better. Sometimes one of those reasons can be, you guessed it, the musical score. But music takes on a bit of a different role when it comes to movies. At least 75% of the time, it's just there to bring life to a scene and help the movie do its job of getting us invested. But on occasion, a film score becomes a significant work in its own right, maybe even more significant than the movie it belongs to. So as you can see, they can often be appreciated at different levels, and the best at times can be immortalized in the cultural fabric. So today we're going to take a look at some of the movie's soundtracks and scores that I've acquired at different points of my vinyl collecting journey. We're going to work our way down the list from oldest to most recent. So the first in our lineup is the soundtrack from the iconic 1939 film, The Wizard of Oz. I love the album artwork for this, a beautiful traditional storybook style illustration of a scene from the movie. So Wizard of Oz is jam-packed with stellar music, much of it which has been emblazoned in Hollywood's legacy. While this record does not include the classic score, it does feature the movie's song selection by Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg. Decades removed, it's hard not to treat it like some quaint historical artifact, but ultimately, these are fun songs which have stuck around for a reason. If you've watched the movie countless times, then I don't doubt you'll be singing right along to the album, and I'm very glad to have this in my collection. Let us fast forward now, a couple decades to the late 60s. The Graduate is the classic romance dramedy starring Dustin Hoffman as a titular graduate who finds himself in an impossible situation, if you will. He falls in love with a girl while somehow being romantically involved with her mother at the same time. It's an excellent film with a surprising amount of humor and depth to it. And of course, a great story with amazing cinematography would necessitate an amazing soundtrack as well. And we're in luck. As many of you might know, the film's soundtrack is known for featuring some of the most well-known songs by Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, including Mrs. Robinson and The Sound of Silence. Amazing songs for sure. How can you compete, right? Well, it's actually Dave Grusin's instrumentals that I'm more captivated by. As much as I love Simon and Garfunkel's work, I've always been more a fan of the mid-century contemporary pop sound than I am of the folk rock of the day. Or maybe Grusin's work just draws me since I already know Simon and Garfunkel's tunes like the back of my hand. But either way, this album is a quick and enjoyable listen, and it also serves as like a nice time capsule or a time machine if you're needing those late 60s vibes. Now, Stanley Kubrick is without question one of the most highly regarded film directors in history, and unfortunately, I can only say that I've seen a couple of his works, and 2001: A Space Odyssey is not one of them. Producer Ian has been recommending it for years, but I've never gotten around to it. But that didn't stop me from picking up the soundtrack on vinyl record though, and as one of the uninitiated, I can honestly say that listening to this was something of an experience in itself. It's highly cinematic and massive in scope, and I would expect nothing less from anything with the word Space Odyssey on it. Of course, everyone knows also Sprach Zarathustra, the tune that has become a huge part of film and culture. Beyond that, we are treated to otherworldly sweeping orchestral themes, some of which are gorgeous and majestic, others which are dark and foreboding and had me walking across the room to turn on a couple of extra lights. It's an endlessly engaging work and so much more than just the music to a film. This one's a no-brainer. I found it pretty cheap at half-price books, and I suspect you could probably find it just as easily if you're interested. And suddenly, we find ourselves in 1973 with the soundtrack for The Sting, the classic film about two of film history's favorite con men portrayed by Paul Newman and Robert Redford. What's so nice about this soundtrack is that it serves multiple purposes. It's a soundtrack for a classic movie and can be enjoyed as such. You can listen and relive those classic moments in your imagination, but it also makes for a nice collection of old ragtime music. Marvin Hamlish's arrangement of Scott Joplin's timeless and highly recognizable numbers are incredibly entertaining, no pun intended. I don't know how many ragtime fans we've got out there in the audience, but this soundtrack is spectacular and absolutely worth a listen if you're willing to try something a little bit different. In the year 2003, I watched a film trilogy that quite literally changed my life trajectory. A film series that moved me so profoundly that to this day, I'm still in awe of what was accomplished by director Peter Jackson, as well as, and more so, the source material by the father of modern fantasy, J.R.R. Tolkien. The story inspired me, it challenged my imagination, it even helped form my worldview. It was the perfect series, executed at just the right time in history, and playing no small role in this, the optimal film-going experience, is the now iconic score by the legendary Howard Shore. Well, this record is not that, and it's not the soundtrack for the lesser prequel trilogy based on Tolkien's original novel either. Back in 1977, there was actually an animated version of The Hobbit produced by the team of Rankin and Bass. It's never been my favorite, but some people swear by this cartoon and prefer it to the live-action version. I will say, though, that I do love the songs and the soundtrack for this movie, so we can find agreement there. Glenn Yarborough's The Greatest Adventure is a masterpiece, and the rest of those folk ballads with lyrics taken directly from Tolkien are absolutely delightful. And well, this album is not that either. It is rather a spoken word and highly abridged retelling of the Professor's classic tale with segments of the soundtrack worked in. It's not exactly what I was expecting when I picked it up, but as a massive fan of Tolkien and Middle-earth and his work, it was fun to experience it at least once. I'm also digging the clean line work on this 12x12 cover. I'm very fascinated with the interpretation of the goblins, but I think it's really the wood elves in this movie that get done dirty. Now, I'm not about to say that this is my favorite way to relive this story, but I think it at least makes for an interesting addition to the collection. It looks like we get more than one Dustin Hoffman movie in today's lineup. Kramer vs. Kramer is the unforgettable, emotionally charged, Oscar-winning film about a newly single father to a young boy in the custody battle following the divorce. This was an album that I picked up while searching for entries to include for this very video. I wasn't expecting to come across Kramer vs. Kramer, and it's been a while since I watched this movie, but I didn't really remember it for its music, so I thought it'd be fun to jump in, give it a shot, and see what I'd find. Well, to my surprise, I ended up with a lot of heroic composers of the Baroque movement. There's a lot of Vivaldi in here, there's plenty of Henry Purcell, and seeing as these masterpieces have been around long before Kramer vs. Kramer and are still being heard the world over by classical enthusiasts today, it's hard to listen to this as simply the Kramer vs. Kramer soundtrack. It really transcends that, so if you're into those composers from the 1600s, there are probably better places to look than the Kramer vs. Kramer soundtrack, but we do get this heartwarming photo of Ted and Billy, and there's Meryl Streep in the back there. As our 1980s representative, we have one of my favorites, the dystopian sci-fi masterpiece by Ridley Scott, Blade Runner. My goodness, just look at this artwork. A larger-than-life epic with larger-than-life ideas and a larger-than-life score by none other than Vangelis, or Vangelis, I'm not really sure how you say his name, but yes, the Oscar-winning composer and Prague pioneer. As with everything else in this film, these soundscapes are deeply immersive and provide that perfect, brooding neo-noir backdrop. But as an interesting counter to the dark synth craziness, there's also a strikingly seductive saxophone used here and there, and the gentleness of Rachel's piano playing. Remember, she plays beautifully. This one's got it's got it all, from pulse-pounding bangers like the end credits theme to majestic gems of the cinema like Tears in the Rain and my favorite, Memories of Green, a melancholic exploration of texture and sound. Let me say, I love the vibe of the 80s version of 2019 with saxophones and whatnot. Definitely preferable to whatever was on the charts a few years back. So definitely check this out. You can't go wrong with the Blade Runner soundtrack. It blows my mind that this movie, Spider-Man, is now over 20 years old. I still remember coming out of the theater with my friends completely floored at what I had witnessed. I was the perfect age for Raimi's Spider-Man at the time, but now that I'm quite a bit older, I still find that there's plenty to appreciate, including the score that accompanies this classic movie. Danny Elfman perfectly not only captures that creepy, crawly, spidery nature in his themes, but creates a grandiose musical world worthy of the New York City skyline. His themes get suitably tense and dramatic, not just to elevate the fight scenes, but to perfectly emphasize that internal conflict. Peter Parker's classic scenario, the choice between a life of sacrifice and responsibility versus all of his dreams come true. I can't marvel, no pun intended, enough at how incredibly well Danny Elfman nails this score, and the packaging is almost as amazing, no pun intended. Check out that embossing there. Yeah, this nice matte texture, and it's also a numbered vinyl, as you can see there. And let me see if I have the record in here. Beautiful gold color. So yeah, feel free to disagree with me. I love this film trilogy, but I'd pick Raimi's Spider-Man over anything we've seen in the last 15 to 20 years. These movies had artistry, heart, and originality for sure, but one thing it's got in spades that surely no modern hero film can compete with is a phenomenal musical score. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World has been in the news pretty recently, so it seems like a great time to revisit stellar soundtrack and score for the live-action cult classic from 2010. I went into this movie blind back when it was in theaters. I went home that night still trying to process it, but by the next day I was hooked. Hooked on the movie and hooked on the soundtrack. Together they make the ultimate tribute to lovesick millennial indie rockers and pop culture enthusiasts everywhere. Music is a big part of the story, so obviously the soundtrack had to be killer. And we have not one, but two great looking albums. One with the original score and one with the film's song selection, and both are phenomenal. Let's take a look at the soundtrack first. We've got a very eclectic mix going on here, from rock legends like the Rolling Stones, Frank Black, and T-Rex, to some of my favorite indie acts such as Blood Red Shoes, who we've actually covered on this channel. There's Beachwood Sparks, and of course Plumtree, from whom Scott Pilgrim got his name. Additionally, we got original songs from Beck. What more could you ask for? It's a well-paced collection, and it all meshes better than it should. And as for the original score, Nigel Godrich does a phenomenal job of recapturing the slightly surrealist nature of the movie by creating the cold, ethereal environment. It sounds very much like what I imagine a cold winter night in Toronto feels like, very ambient and shoegazy for the film's quieter character moments. And on the other end of the spectrum, we get vibrant washes of electro and abundance of 8-bit sounding stuff, which is a given considering the influence video gaming has on the movie, as well as Brian Lee O'Malley's original graphic novel. So yeah. And speaking of video games, we got another album here for you. Very shortly before peak COVID, the world was treated to the little video game adaptation that could, Sonic the Hedgehog. It's no Godfather, but somehow it's better than anyone was expecting, maybe. And it was even improved upon by its sequel 2 very fast years later. I'm a huge lifelong Sonic appreciator, and I can objectively say that these family-friendly adventures are good. They're all right. They're pretty much what they need to be, nothing more, nothing less. And those also happen to be my thoughts on the soundtrack by Tom Holkenborg, aka Junkie XL. The guy's got tons of experience composing for Hollywood blockbusters, but his score for Sonic is mostly just serviceable. It's good as a compliment to what we're seeing on the big screen, but a character like Sonic needs some distinct, colorful themes, and we don't really get that. And maybe the most frustrating thing for me as a lifelong Sonic the Hedgehog player is that this particular video game series is well known in the gaming world for having some of the most brilliant and catchy music around, incorporating J-pop, funk, punk, hip-hop, jazz, Eurobeat, and so on. And I understand a film score serves a different purpose, but I think I would have appreciated something closer to the vein of the music from the games, or possibly even incorporate more of those classic Genesis themes beyond the snippet from Green Hill Zone that we got. And not to bring up old rivalries, but the recent Super Mario Bros. Movie executed this very, very well in my opinion. The iconic Sonic themes were just right there for the taking, and the filmmakers didn't go for it, unfortunately. So ultimately, it's just a mildly amusing listen, but I am digging the color vinyl. So hopefully they get it right in the third film. And lastly, there's Dune. This cover is an exclusive variant from MondoShop.com's record store, or the record shop. I think that's the verbiage they use. Dune was such an enthralling film-going experience, the likes of which I hadn't really experienced in the better part of a decade. Denis Villeneuve has been one of the most exciting film directors in recent years, and Frank Herbert's sci-fi classic has proven itself to be an enduring opus since its publication in 1965. It's sad but somewhat understandable that it's taken this long to properly adapt the story of Paul Atreides, aka Muad'Dib. It's a pretty dense novel in the physical sense and sometimes thematically, exploring political themes as well as the eternal messages of corruption and the dangers of power and so on. The movie was so far beyond what my imagination had conjured when I went through the novel, and in my opinion, Hans Zimmer rose to the occasion and delivered the insane level of epicness that the story needed, and what we've come to expect from him. I've been blown away by several of the themes from this movie, such as the Caladan music, House Atreides' arrival on Arrakis, the Harkonnen invasion sequence, and I especially love the Bene Gesserit theme, which I think captures those particular characters to a T. I have a feeling the music from Dune is going to prove to have some serious longevity. I've loved going back to these tunes the last couple of years, and it certainly eased some of the pain of Dune Part 2 getting delayed over and over again. So there you go. Check out the back. Paul's first experience with the spice, and Vladimir Harkonnen doing his thing. Great movie. So that's about all we have for today. Those are our film selections and the vinyl that accompanied them. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any favorite musical scores, it doesn't even have to be on vinyl. Just let me know in the comments. I'd love to read some of those. And yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. We'll be back very soon with more reviews, and you're very welcome to check out some of our other videos from our B-side series, including a showcase on anime vinyl. We have a tier list and a couple of other fun things. So feel free to check those out. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you again very soon. And yeah, have a good one.